So this is the panel session on more inclusive virtual interactions. And this is a panel that is made up of people that have put together contributed talks in relation to this topic. And if you haven't had a chance to see them already, then you can go to the exhibitors section and look for the ones that start with a Z2. And I will be feeding them questions from the Q&A segment of the Hoopva platform. So over either on your right-hand side or in the phone application under Q&A, you can leave them questions and I will feed them to them during the talks. There's also a chat window there. So for any other discussion and anything we don't get to, the panelist here can go and interact with that discussion later. So first off, what I'd like to do is have the panelists introduce themselves and explain a little bit about the contributed material or talk that they have included in that exhibitor section to give it a head start. Thank you. Go ahead. Philly, do you want to get started?
Yep, I'll get started. So hi everyone, my name is Philly and I'm a master's student at the International Centre for Radio Astronomy Research in Perth. I guess my kind of contribution was a poster. So I'm a hard of hearing person. So I find traditional conferences like face-to-face very difficult. So I just put together like a little infographic with tips that you can do as a presenter or when you're socializing in breakouts or as an organizer that from my experience, I think would have helped me in a number of conferences. So I guess it is important to say that about 1 in 6 people do have a hearing loss of some form. And it's not necessarily just old people. I've had this hearing loss since I was born. So yeah, I can't hear like the top half of the frequency range. So it makes like interpreting conversation especially in a really crowded environment with a lot of background noise, really difficult. And I also need to be face-to-face with someone to understand what they're saying. So I use lip reading quite a bit. Unfortunately, I don't actually know sign language. So that's definitely on my to-do list once I hand in my thesis at the end of the year. Yeah. So on my poster, there's just some tips, like for when you're presenting your work, obviously face your audience, speak slowly and clearly, use a microphone when you can, even if you're asking questions. I know there's a lot of people who, when the microphone's being passed around, they say, oh, I don't need a microphone, I'm loud enough, but you're not, I'm sorry to break it to you. So yeah, and then also socializing, I find like the coffee breaks quite difficult with just, again, a lot of background noise. So if you notice someone's like standing on the edge, like don't really know, not really participating, so try and include them where you can. And yeah, I guess that's kind of it for my overview.
Thanks, Philly. Travis, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Travis Rector. I'm a professor at the University of Alaska in Anchorage. And I'm also the chair of the Sustainability Committee for the American Astronomical Society. And in that role for several years, we've been looking at virtual meetings as a way of reducing the carbon footprint of our professional society. A recent assessment found that virtual meetings have less than 1% the carbon footprint of face-to-face meetings. So we're very excited about moving in this direction. And unfortunately, COVID-19 has given us an opportunity to move into it even faster. And the reason why I'm part of this panel today is in this process of thinking about virtual meetings, we've also come to realize some hard truths about our face-to-face meetings. And that is that there's a lot of barriers for participation, and not the least of which is actually getting to the meeting. Our professional society has about 10,000 members, and even our largest meetings only have about 3,000 participants. And so that means more than 2/3 of our membership is not participating in our meetings. And so just even getting there is a major problem, whether because you lack a travel budget or because you have professional commitments, like you have to teach classes, or you have family. If you have a young family and you have children and being away is hard, if you have disabilities that make it difficult to attend meetings, these are all barriers for participation. And in particular, young astronomers are not able to participate as much. And this last summer, because of COVID, we moved our summer meeting online, and it went from 500 members participating to over 1,200. So we more than doubled. And it just made it clear that there's a lot of people who aren't able to normally participate. So a common complaint when it comes to virtual meetings, people say, well, face-to-face is really important because of the interactions and the opportunities to meet new collaborators. And I like to remind people to think about who isn't there that you could have collaborated with if they were able to clear that barrier. So that's something that I'm really excited about with virtual meetings, like this one right here, where me going from Alaska to Australia is not very realistic for just a week-long conference. It's an opportunity for people to participate. So that's what's really exciting about the future of virtual meetings.
Thank you very much, Travis. And our other panelist is Zoe. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Zoe Rose. I am a user experience designer in beautiful Canberra. So I am a disability enthusiast and design for disability enthusiast. And ironically, I started on that trajectory before I had a shocking injury in November 2018 and became seriously disabled. So irony never sleeps, it turns out. My contribution to the recorded content was essentially a crash course in disability theory. The idea that disability is not necessarily located only in the body, but in the interaction between impairments in the body and barriers in the person's environment, physical ones, social ones, communication ones. And it concluded with some advice and tips on how to reduce or remove barriers in the context of online discussion. My focus on that was actually on cognitive and mental impairments. So Philly, I want to pick up on what you said before about being hearing impaired. I thought for many years that I had hearing loss, and I was baffled and bewildered because I'd go in for the tests and they would say, your hearing is perfect. And I would say, but I can't hear anything. And you know what? I don't have hearing loss, but it turns out I do have ADHD. Which is Billy's nodding, which is a neurological condition that, amongst many impacts, reduces the brain's ability to determine what is an important signal and what is not an important signal. So as a consequence, while I do not have hearing loss, I'm yet another example of a person with an impairment that impairs my communication in those social environments. So hello to all you hard of hearing people. Speaking as someone with excellent hearing, I share many experiences with you.
Thank you very much to everybody. So we've already got some questions coming in, so we'll get going on some of those. So the first one from a participant is for Philly. Have you seen accessibility improve in conferences recently? Or does it seem like there is still a long way to go? And I guess I'll let Philly answer, but also if anybody else wants to contribute, I'm happy to have them do so.
Yeah. This is a hard one because I'm very new on the game. I'm just a baby master's student, so I haven't been to that many conferences, I guess, to get that experience. But I am finding that the organizers and in the traditional conference itself, everyone's definitely a lot more aware. So even on the registration forms, you can actually put, if you're hearing impaired, and people can accommodate various seating positions or whatever for you. But I think there is still a long way to go in terms of the networking and the social aspect of conferences, like conference dinners, coffee breaks. I'm just always just sitting there I can't hear what's going on. Even with my hearing aids in, it's very difficult because everyone's just chatting, and it's so exciting. And we're often indoors, so there's a lot of echo going around. I just end up sitting there having food. It's a great time. Yeah.
Does anybody else want to comment on what their experience has been, if it has improved?
I would say there's probably some advances we're seeing recently. I'm reminded of an event that I went to a few years ago where I was a speaker as well. And the speaker before me stood up in front of everybody with a really complicated set of PowerPoint slides, ones with tiny little font, don't do that, and lots of information displayed as a chart, don't do that. We can come back to why not later, I'm just flagging. And this person stood in front of their chart and said, well, as you can see, blah, 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 blah. And what this shows is, that was the other one, what this shows us is, and then just said a bunch of stuff which was based on this information that was presented visually. I said already, irony never sleeps. That was at a Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and we literally had blind people, identified known blind people in the audience. So I would say that it pays not to become complacent. Just because you, and this is something I always have to remind myself of, just because you've signed up and gone, yep, accessibility is really important and we definitely want to get into that, doesn't mean that you're immune from those very kind of fundamental mistakes. Yeah, so I would say that it is getting better in general, but human nature always leads us towards forgetting the basics. And we must be forever vigilant not to forget the basics, really.
Thank you. So our next question was, do you feel that organizations and event organizers are doing enough to support inclusivity for online? We found that extra costs are often or not accounted for. Is there a standard checklist that everybody should be considering?
Well, I'll just say that in the case of the conferences I've been attending, these have all been meetings that we've put together very quickly. They're meetings that we're not intending to be online, and then within months of the meeting, all of a sudden we were. And I think one of the mistakes that we're making so far, and this is one we're going to make, is that we're trying to hold traditional face-to-face meetings online. And the analogy a friend used that really resonated with me is, and that is that when television was first created, no one knew how to do a TV show, so they did radio shows on TV. And I think that's really where we are now. We know how face-to-face meetings work. They are spread over 3 or 4 days in a very intense environment. And there's a lot of constraints placed upon that are no longer exist. And we're now in this whole new parameter space that allows us to think about how we can do things differently. And so rather than just try to recreate what we know, I hope we can use this as an opportunity to see the weaknesses in how we do things now so that we can create a system that allows people to participate and do so in a way that's fair for everyone.
I want to pick up on the checklist question there for a second, because I am a web person. So what we use on the web, some of you will have heard of this, we use the World Wide Web Consortium Accessibility Guidelines, known as WCAG, currently up to standard 2.1. So the accessibility guidelines, the clue is in the title, they are not rules and it's not a checklist. A lot of people approach WCAG for the first time going, oh, this is a checklist. If I can check off all the boxes, then what I've got is accessible and will work. Unfortunately, it's a bit stickier than that. And a lot of people get quite flummoxed when they realize it is stickier than that. So to the extent that there's a checklist, there's WCAG, with the caveat that it's not actually a checklist. And it's worth pointing out as well that there is no such thing as the accessible solution. The example I use for this, if you have a vision impairment and you're using a web service of any kind, you want very high contrast. High contrast is really beneficial for you. It helps you to perceive the information. However, if you have dyslexia, and 6% of Australians do, high contrast will actually make the information harder to read. And a lower level of contrast, or potentially a slightly colored background, like a beige background or a magnolia background, will make it easier for you to perceive. So that's 2 impairments and 2 requirements, and they are contraindicated. So there's no magical checklist which covers all impairments and removes all barriers, because the barriers themselves are sometimes contradictory.
Very good point. Thank you, Zoe. Philly, do you have anything else to add on that question in particular?
Yeah, I think, no, it is very important to note that there's not a one size fits all. So I guess be able and open to receiving feedback on the spot and like adapting to individuals' needs. So if someone, I don't know, just make it a bit easier for someone to come up and say, hey, I'm finding this bit difficult. Could we maybe try something like this? So I think that's important to really be aware that everyone's needs are different and try your best to include people and do some things you might not have thought of at the start.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry, I was trying to read through the questions coming in. So what is the importance, do you think, of making marketing and promotion of events accessible as well as the event itself? Zoe, do you want to start with that one?
Yep, I can start with that one. So marketing has a longer history in visual design than it does in usability design. A lot of marketing comes from early 20th century technologies around designing posters, which were the first like really mass reproducible mass communication blurts that come out. So a lot of the roots of marketing are very heavily in a visual area, which is not necessarily going to be accessible to everybody. In this context, I think that it is worth pointing out basic web fixes like using alt text have value, because not every, if you have an image and there's words on the image, a screen reader won't read them. We need a secondary way in. So I think that if I was going to focus on one barrier when it comes to marketing, it would probably be the barrier around who's in the room, who's getting included, which channels are you using. If your dissemination channel is, for example, only on LinkedIn, then the people the people who are going to see that are the people who are already going to be on LinkedIn. You might be missing out on catchments just on the basis of the environment or the context that you're choosing to disseminate information. It's the fastest and earliest way to bake in bias. And unfortunately, it's also the one you are going to be able to identify least easily, because once you've done your marketing and people who are from a small percentage of your potential total audience turn up, well, you're going to think that that's actually just your potential audience. You won't know who's not there. So I would focus on the bricks and mortar of moving away from those baked in elements of visual design as an exclusive mechanism, but also separately give consideration to the channels and who isn't in them.
Travis, do you have anything to add to that?
The only experience I would say might be relevant to that is that if technology is not functioning properly, it definitely can be a barrier to participation. And so if you know, many conferences now have web apps that, you know, give the schedule where talks are and that sort of thing. And if it is not accessible, as we have found to be the case sometimes, then that is a major barrier. So whether it is someone who's trying to register for a conference and determine whether or not this is a conference they wish to attend, to someone who is actually present, whether it be face-to-face or virtually, that is a critical component.
Excellent. Philly, did you have something to add as well?
Not really, because I think, you know, for my personal disability, I'm hard of hearing, so I've never really found, you know, the advertising and the visual aspects a barrier for me, but it's certainly eye-opening. Like, I didn't know that like text readers couldn't do the text on images, so I'll go through and put a nice little caption on my poster. Yeah, so little things like that you can just pick up just from being, you know, open and discussing, yeah, common disabilities. So yeah, it's been good.
Excellent, thank you very much. Another question that has come in was, reading has always been a problem for me at bigger multi-track conferences. It's almost impossible to work out what the talks to go to. How would you might solve that problem, or some suggestions around that? Zoe, did you want to start? You're shaking your head.
Why not? So one of the things that we find in design world is that historically and very reliably, when we can solve a problem for someone who has an impairment, everyone else likes it too. So the vast majority of high literacy people prefer reading information that was written for low literacy people. you will be using in your day-to-day life all the time, things that were originally invented for people with disabilities, such as, like good grips can openers were made for people with arthritis. The touch screen on your phone was originally developed by a company called Fingerworks for a man who I think had either rheumatoid arthritis or Parkinson's and couldn't tap tiny buttons. So we tend to find there's this very, very strong pattern that when we design for a really tricky problem, a hard problem, the solution ends up being preferred by people who would not necessarily have identified as having a problem in the first place. So I think in the case of that question there, my answer would be the designer's go-to, which is in design, we like to understand a problem in great detail. So our theory is always that the better you understand a problem, the better you're able to solve it. So we would love to talk to you in more detail about like what exactly it is about the program that you find challenging. How is that really working for you? What things help, what things don't, really understand that problem. But I would say with confidence that if we sat down and really understood that problem and really solved it well, everyone would probably like it better than a big, chunky, complex program. I don't like them either.
Excellent. Does Travis or Philly have anything else to add to that?
No, that was fantastic.
So I've got a question for Travis in particular around sustainability. You had mentioned that in your summary, and I know it's in your talk as well. It says, are there any reports capturing virtual conferences and environmental impact, especially comparing to pre-COVID and post-COVID now, e.g. % reduced carbon emissions or reduced in paper waste?
Yes, so a colleague of mine who's actually presenting at this meeting, Leonard Berkshire, just did an analysis of the European Astronomical Society's meeting this summer. And like our summer meeting, they doubled their enrollment, but they did a carbon footprint assessment and they found that they were only generating 0.3% of what a face-to-face meeting. The entire conference, once you add in all of the computing power for Zoom and everything else that was necessary, it was equivalent to one person flying from London to Munich. So, so these sorts of assessments are going on. Nature Astronomy just this last week released several papers written by different organizations, including one in Australia, analyzing the carbon footprint of astronomical activities. And astronomy is finally taking the issue seriously and recognizing that in our profession, the two major footprints are the obvious one, travel, but also supercomputing. And so so to answer that question, that yes, that analysis is being done. We haven't done it yet for the AAS, but whether it's 0.3% or 1% or 2%, it's clear that virtual meetings are just vastly superior from a carbon footprint standpoint.
Excellent, thank you very much. Philly, do you have any comments on sustainability or anything that you've been seen recently?
Yeah, so I just think, yeah, the online meetings is obviously a really great way to reduce the air. Obviously, plane travel, that I'm guessing is what the main kind of reduction has been in all those figures that you spoke about, Travis. But I think there's also a lot of stuff you can do in your own personal life as well. Like, yes, not flying to conferences is great, but you know, things like just reducing your intake of meat, like limiting, I don't know what else, aggressive vegan agenda coming through here. But yeah, just little things like that that you can do on a personal level as well as a big conferencing level that can also really help to sustainability.
So something I'd like to add, I forgot to mention. I mean, in this one of the Nature Astronomy, one of the analyses is of Australian astronomy, and part of the paper was to just simply add up the carbon footprint of all the astronomers, and whether it's Australia or the United States or any other country, one pattern has become abundantly clear, and that is senior staff, senior astronomers there's a huge discrepancy between their travel budgets and between graduate students. and postdocs. And so senior astronomers are generating 5 to 10 times as much carbon footprint. And it really does point out the discrepancy in our business and the difference between the haves and the have-nots. And so one of the things I like to emphasize, in whatever plans we put forward, we need to make sure that the new model doesn't widen the gap between haves and have-nots, so that we use this as an opportunity to bring people on board and give them the same opportunities that everyone should have. So that's been another interesting part of these analyses.
Excellent. Does anybody else have anything else to add to that one? All right, excellent. I think that's all the questions I can find in the question and answer section. Does anybody else have anything that they really wanted to bring up or discuss before we close out of this over the next few minutes? I'll start with Zoe. You have one thing?
This is just a small anecdote that I want to share because I love accessibility. I love it so much. I really do. And I am very keen that anyone who's watching this or engaging with this walks away thinking, you know what, that's just basically a good idea. That's a good idea. So I want to give you an anecdote. For a couple of years ago, I gave a talk at my industry's national conference, which is UX Australia, about disability in design and why you should do it. And throughout, I was doing my very level best to be really inclusive. So every time I had a new slide, I would just describe what was on the slide. This is a picture of, this is an X, this is a Y, and so on. And when I went back to watch the video later, I got a surprise, because it turned out that that year, for whatever reason, UX Australia weren't doing video. They were only doing audio. Mine was one of the only talks you could actually follow, because every time I had a slide come up, I would actually say what was on it. So my slide still made sense, where a lot of my talk still made sense, where a lot of other people were actually impossible. So just in terms of making decisions that are more likely to give you the greatest longevity, the greatest utility, the greatest scope, the greatest breadth, now that we are dealing with a technological environment as opposed to a purely social environment, everything that you can do that increases the accessibility of what you're putting out is quite likely to increase the longevity of it, the breadth of it, and the replayability of it too. So the benefits don't have a stop point. You will be surprised by the benefits that knock onto you. I didn't plan to be the person who had the good audio feed. That wasn't my intention, but it was an outcome. So we cannot predict the positive benefits that knock on from accessible practices using technology, but they're always popping up.
Great points. Thank you. Philly, do you have any closing words you would like to say?
I guess, like, in a world where you can be anything, choose to be kind and choose to include others, and yeah, just do your best. We're all obviously learning. There's not like one perfect way to do things, as long as you're trying, keeping this conversation open and doing what you can to make sure everyone gets a lot out of whatever it is you're hosting.
Thank you, Philly. And Travis, do you have any final words you would like to have as take-home messages for people?
Yeah, I think, in the line of climate change, we've learned a lot about helping people understand how doing things differently can actually make their lives better. And people are naturally resistant to change. And this is particularly true for those for which the system works. If you are accustomed to going to face-to-face meetings and it's a successful experience for you, it's easy to say, everything seems fine by me. I don't know why we need to change. And so I think one of the big challenges is to help people see that there are better ways of doing things, and it will make things better for everyone. And so Zoe, your message about how just by taking the time to make things more inclusive, it makes everything better for everyone. And in my line of work in astronomy, and it's true for a lot of people here, it's all about productivity. It's about science productivity. If we can do things in a way that increases our science productivity, increases participation, then I think people will naturally get on board. So, like a lot of people, I was very skeptical about online meetings. I love to travel. I love to, see new places, see friends in person. But this is fantastic. I mean, this is not this experience here right now. This is not something I would have been able to do otherwise. And so having these great experiences online with these virtual meetings, I think will help people see what the future can be like.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of the panelists for joining us. And I do encourage anybody that is viewing this to go to the exhibitor section, go down to the Z2s and watch these talks if you haven't already, or look at Philly's poster. And also I encourage the panelists to please go into the agenda session and interact with the chat session and the questions and answers that have been put up so far. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.